For Steve, from the way you were talking, I'm going to assume that it is impossible to negotiate favored nations provisions in those contracts? So that if any other entity gets a lower price, you're automatically guaranteed? So you could have a modification or a scaling of the pricing in your contract just based on maybe a better price at the same entity?
You mean in the power contract itself?
Yeah.
My understanding, and I will tell you, I'm not a electric power contract person, but my understanding is that's not something that is typically seen for a couple of reasons. Number one, the pricing in power contracts is typically confidential, so you wouldn't even necessarily know if that happened. That's the main reason. When we were doing our negotiations, we consulted with a number of people, and that was never anything that was suggested as a possibility. So it leads me to believe that it isn't.
And if I could, just really quick for anybody, what level of granularity of data did you need to really, crunch the numbers in advance? Because obviously we can only get aggregated data out of the IOUs.
Actually, that's one of the things that is important to start in any process. The earlier you start petitioning PG&E for that data, the better. And they do give you granular data. It's by each meter and 15-minute increments. It's very granular.
Thank you.
Item 16 and 17 on, what is it, Schedule 21? Schedule 21. The advice is to go in together with your low data request, even though every city has to sign off on that, and county, that there would be one request because it's just less expensive, and then, from a time efficiency perspective, you get it all at once.
Yes, next question.
I have a question about forming. So let's say that there was political will in this area among 4 cities to go forward, and that was pretty much a given. And well, this is hypothetical. Thank you. How long does it take to form a JPA given political will? Is that a very fast thing to do? Could my city attorney draft something tomorrow?
Yeah, you could take a look at ours. You could take a look at Marin's as a model, and you could do that. Yeah, so the joint powers agreements are really routine, and you could do one very quickly.
I mean, staffing them is a bigger deal. So my next question goes to what happens in the circumstance where perhaps the water district isn't as savvy or the right vehicle to get something going, or the county isn't because they perhaps don't have the political will. And these are hypothetical questions, but I'm just so what I was wondering is, could an existing power utility with great expertise in the field, and it happens that we have a representative here from Silicon Valley Power, who's here in her capacity as a council member from the city of Los Altos. But I was wondering if that kind of expertise and that existing quasi-public or public agency could be the birth mother for this in our area, or are there legal requirements that would preclude that?
Under the CCA statute, only cities, counties, and a few special districts, including the water agency, can form and operate a CCA program.
So an existing municipal utility could not?
Could not, although that wouldn't preclude you from forming a JPA and contracting with them for, advice and work.
Okay, right. And so that went to my last question. Let somebody else have this. In Sonoma, you have only 9 employees. Is that correct? At this point. I'm familiar with municipal governance in finance department that requires separating fiscal responsibility so there's checks and balances. Can you really get it done with 9, or are you substantially contracting out a lot of the work to others of operating this thing?
Yeah, the accounting function is contracted out, and
okay.
that was an auditor who set up that system of checks and balances. We also contract with the county treasurer, who provides sort of like a second level of backup. So you can do it with very few in-house employees.
Thank you very much.
Can I add to that, though, real quick? Marin does the same thing. And, so for example, Noble's in the room is just one vendor. I think what Marin is moving toward is bringing more and more of the functions in-house that make sense vis-a-vis procurement, accounting, all of those sorts of functions. They have made a determination that there are certain functions relative to scheduling, power, and some of the more complex data management services that they're not going to bring in-house simply because they've done a cost benefit and have decided that it's better to pay for that expertise than try and train it in-house. So you all can make up your mind about how you do that.
Just noting that the other distinction between the two programs, at least right now, is that Marin is expanding quite quickly to incorporate other jurisdictions, whereas Sonoma has paused that part of the program, at least for now. And I'm wondering if that was part of the driver for starting to think it was a good idea to bring these functions in-house, and then once you have them, you're like, wow, I've got someone to do that. They could do it for a bunch of more people.
I'm off the board now, so I'm not speaking officially for Marin.
That's okay.
Keep in mind that Marin Clean Energy launched in 2010. It's now 2014. So the program has moved rapidly, but I think Sonoma's paused in part because it's not serving all of its jurisdictions in the county yet, and they're only at phase 1. So you've got some, real differences in terms of implementation. So they're not at full rollout. After that, they may make a policy decision not to expand. It's unknown. What Marin has done, and I think it bears some revision, and they're going to be looking at that in their retreat tomorrow, is that they determined that you could spread costs. I mean, the more customers you have, you can spread those fixed costs over a broader customer base. So the question is going to become, how big is too big, and what is the appropriate footprint? Somebody asked about legislation. I would not be at all surprised if legislation comes back next year that proposes a limitation on the size of CCAs, because nobody's really interested in having a monopoly CCA situation. It's counterintuitive to what they're meant to be. So unknown what that looks like, but I do think you'll probably see some that are multi-county, multi-jurisdictional, but I don't think that they'll really go too much further beyond that.
I have a question for Will. So we've heard that about, Jeff referred to this letter that's been sent to the city of Lancaster about their bonding requirement. Do you know about this?
A little bit.
Okay. So that red flag got put up that this is the next way that IOUs are going to try and crush and stop CCA formation. Do you think that's true? And if so, what do you think the likelihood is that that will happen?
I can't really speak to what Edison might do to, this is coming from Edison in Southern California. They're saying that the Public Utilities Commission of California should revisit this bond amount and maybe increase it significantly. So far it's just a letter arguing that this should be the case. They haven't, as to my knowledge, haven't filed any formal documentation with the commission asking us to do that. And I definitely wouldn't sit here and pretend to know what the 5 commissioners might vote on with that. But certainly it seems like something that, certainly not out of the realm of possibility that that could become an issue, and we might have to revisit the bond amount. That $100,000 was fixed as an interim bond amount via resolution, so it's, I guess, always subject to revision, like many things at the PUC. I don't have much more than that, sorry.
They still let me keep the mic. So this might be my most self-serving question. I promised just to have this one. For Cordell and Steve, it sounds like it was a lot of work to put this together, and that you talked about the many council meetings that you went to bring all these parties together. How did your organizations handle creating that capacity to do this particular project in addition to your regular work?
Great question.
I have like 4 of my Sunnyvale colleagues with me here today. Mostly my bosses.
Well, I'll tell you, we did not add any extra staff to do this. So
That's the wrong answer.
So the what I got to get what I got to do is get really good at delegating what I was normally supposed to be doing. So fortunately, I had excellent staff below me that could take on some of the other things that I had been doing. And I'll be honest, this was probably the most gratifying thing I've ever done in my career. It was hard. It was very difficult at times. I mean, I had to work with Anne Hancock a lot. and Jeff Cyphers. Yeah. You know, I can remember when Jeff Cyphers was just a second-tier consultant to us, and now he's, never mind. I'm not bitter, no. No, but it was a great time and extremely gratifying to get this up and running and to see it take off and be as a successful, beyond my wildest dreams, successful. So yes, it was hard work, and I had to do my other job on top of this, but it was well worth it.
Next question. These are great. This is just what I had hoped, this peer-to-peer conversation that you would be able to have. And here we have another staff member getting to talk to Steve. Yeah, go for it.
Thank you very much. 2 questions. So we've heard a little bit today about RECs and caution around RECs and trying to explain RECs to the participants. So I would be curious to know a couple of things. First of all, what percentage of the Moran and Sonoma portfolios are RECs? So that's part A. And part B, just any words of wisdom regarding handling that conversation. And then the second question is related to residential versus commercial. Earlier we had Intuit talk about customers who are on direct access. They may be locked in, or they're likely locked in for certain contracts for certain periods of time. And it sounds like the conversation and the approach for outreach to the residential versus the commercial businesses is fairly different. And I haven't heard a lot talked about that today. So just, again, welcome any comments from anyone, just differentiating the approach residential versus commercial.
Okay, the first question was about RECs. And I can't speak definitively about Sonoma Clean Power's portfolio. I believe that they are still right at the renewable portfolio standard is what is allowed for RECs. But I know that they're making a concerted effort to eliminate RECs from their portfolio. They don't. They understand the issues with them, and they don't want to have to be having that argument. So they're working to eliminate them. As far as the business versus residential, we did have a marketing campaign that looked at both of those types of entities. And I have to give credit to the Climate Protection Campaign and Ann Hancock for their Friends of Sonoma Clean Power. They had a strong element of the business community involved in that, and it was very effective with what they did with the business community. And we've actually used that in our marketing campaigns to highlight businesses that have switched over and why.
I'd just like to add one thing about the business and commercial customers. One of the, since direct access went away in California, I mean, some people have it because they were kind of grandfathered in. But one of the things that community choice aggregation programs can do is they can provide programs for larger customers that currently aren't on direct access accounts that could kind of, mirror the kind of deals that they could have gotten if direct access were in existence. So, in other words, if a business has a certain need for a certain, portfolio of power, the CCA can provide that in a way that it might not be able to be provided to that customer now. So it's a potential benefit to large users that isn't much talked about with CCAs, but it is another advantage that if you get a consultant who's going to be working with you on the program, ask them about that. Ask them what kind of programs that they can put in place. And I know Sonoma Clean Power right now has hired somebody particularly for that, to go out to bigger commercial customers and try to, work with them on getting them kind of better deals within the CCA program.
Just quickly on RECs, this RECs could be a whole nother workshop in the afternoon. So I guess what I would suggest, just in terms of how you hold it in the container, is that RECs are a legitimate market tool. They're used extensively across the country, perhaps too much. But at the same time, recs really are a policy decision that should be made at the CCA level by the governing board and, by your procurement, folks, because there's the good and the bad of recs. I mean, without them, things potentially are more expensive in terms of actually buying all of the bundled renewable power. So there's bundled recs and unbundled recs. There is a case to be made for a both and solution because recs can be used to bring costs down and to remain competitive. So this is one of these issues where you need to understand them. This do your homework thing, the FAQ. Let's understand them and perhaps be clear on how you address that up front without over-promising that you either will use them or you won't. Because I think you don't want to tie both hands behind your backs on the case of recs too early.
Steve, didn't you have a second part to your question?
Residential versus commercial.
Yeah, residential versus commercial. Yeah, I already answered. Oh, you did? Okay. That's covered. Okay, Brian?
Time for one more?
Definitely.
Great. I just wanted to briefly mention that the Santa Clara Valley Habitat Plan Joint Powers Authority was just formed last year. And we just hired our first permanent employee 2 months ago, our executive director. And also that the Santa Clara County Emergency Operational Area Council, which is in a transitional process, possibly to become its own Joint Powers Authority, has worked out a voting situation to balance out City of San Jose versus all the other cities that are much smaller. So you've pointed out that these problems are surmountable, and we're actually dealing with these problems already here in this county. So I just wanted to point out that we've got a lot of that knowledge in place. I want to mention that. And the other question, the question I had was, I guess for you, Steve, was as far as protecting the various partner agencies from liability, does that mean that there was some type of price premium you were paying to your power suppliers because they knew they couldn't go after anyone except the JPA?
It's not my impression that we paid a price premium for that. They were primarily relying on the fact that we were in we have a captive market. People need to have power, so they're going to pay their bills. And there was, Jeff mentioned this lockbox account that they have, and they were relying on that mostly for their security. So no, I don't think we were paying more for that.
Other questions? Yes.
This question's for Steve, I believe. Steve, you mentioned that as you were reaching out to the cities, you offered them the opportunity to participate but not become a part of the JPA. So does that mean they still adopted resolutions so that you can service their customers? And then did you actually have any who went that route?
The answer to the second part is yes. They still have to pass a resolution and an ordinance in order to participate in the program. And basically all of the cities that are participating right now are participating as non-members of the JPA. The only two members of the JPA right now are still the water agency and the county of Sonoma.
Okay, thank you.
Can I ask a question on that? No. Is that a political move or was that a? Never mind. Okay.
It was.
I was not expecting that answer.
Well, again, it was part of the triple firewall. They, to the extent that cities were concerned about having liability as members of a JPA, if they're not members of the JPA, that's one less argument for imposing liability on them. And that was essentially the reason. And the reason Cordell mentioned the reason that we formed the JPA up front between the county and the water agency was so that we could go out and do our RFP for power. To have an entity to do that. We didn't have an entity up until that point. So we could actually get the indicative pricing. So then when we went back to the cities, we could really give them an idea of what the rates were going to be.
Is there an advantage to being part of the JPA?
I don't think once they get a member on the board and get control of governance, I don't think being a member of the JPA gets them anything, frankly. Correct. They get a member on the board, and they get input into the policy decisions that are made, but they're just not technically signatories to the JPA document. But the JPA document contemplates this happening.
Exactly. Good works. Other questions? Yes.
I'm not sure who the question is for. It's really the kind of another worst case possibility, which I think a lot about. That was interesting because I've heard several presentations on this, and I've never heard anybody talk about the risks of this program, and I've always wondered about it. But one of the things that has concerned me is I think that PG&E, to a certain degree at least, has some backup capability to send power different directions through the region in their service area. Does the JPA or community choice model provide for different sources of power? For example, the presenter that showed power coming from Washington and Oregon, if there was some disruption for a period of time from power coming there, are there backup plans in the agreement that cover that?
Well, actually, the power grid is not controlled by PG&E. It's controlled by the California Independent Service Operator. So they're responsible for making sure that the power gets where it needs to be used. So I think that answers the question. And Steve, did you have something you want to add to that? So,
what about the power coming from Washington?
Well, if again, the California Independent Service Operator will tell the generators to turn on what's called spinning reserve, natural gas plants that are just held in reserve for us in an eventuality like that. So they direct that to make sure that the grid stays up and healthy.
It's important, and Jeff sort of alluded to this, it's important to think about the grid not so much as power coming from one source, to here. It's basically just there's inputs into the grid, people take out from the grid, and everything that we're talking about purchasing power and purchasing power from water, those are all really just financial transactions. So your question is, the answer is no, that's really not a concern. There are some costs that are attendant to transmitting power long distances. Jeff talked about congestion revenue rights and so on, but those are all balanced within the system, and PG&E is as subject to them, I think, as CCAs are.
The hard question Jeff alluded to is, how do I distinguish the clean from the dirty power?
Exactly.
And your answer is it doesn't. They're putting power into the grid in Washington, and it's a financial transaction.
Exactly.
Am I allowed to ask a political question? I'm interested in understanding why the IBEW appears to feel threatened by community choice aggregation. Excuse me, I won't use aggregation, CCAs. And in particular, I can appreciate why the union and its membership might want a bargaining chit with the utilities, but I don't, if we have need for transmission capacity and if union contractors may or may not be used for producing new generation capacity, is there any real concern that labor ought to have, or can we somehow bring them around over time so that they present less of a political force to those of us who stand for elected office?
Yes, and I don't envy you that. I've had a hard time with this. Our local IBEW chapter was involved with our program from day one. We invited them to become a member of our steering committee, and they attended every single meeting. And the locals didn't seem to have too much of an issue with our program. The opposition came from the San Francisco office, and I can only assume that there was some, maneuvering going on between PG&E and IBEW. And that's my own personal opinion, but that's seemed to be what the case was. The projects that we're working on as a local agency, anything that we put together on public land or as that we're going to end up owning, has to be covered by prevailing wage. And so we're not sure why that may be their concern, is that you're going to be trying to develop renewable energy projects that will not use union labor. And there are a number of ways to deal with that: project labor agreements, other things of that nature. But that's the only thing that I can see out there from them. And Sean, do you have anything else?
Only mitigation strategy. And Woody might be able to comment on this, because it does seem to be, it's not inflated, but it's certainly a statewide issue that we saw in 2145. I think the mitigation strategy is to invite them to the table early and often, make sure that everyone understands what the terms are. I will say in response to some of the ongoing difficulty with labor, Marin Clean Energy just last week at its board meeting put together a sustainable workforce policy where it clearly articulates what its requirements are in hiring and all of that. And if I understand the IBEW's kind of historical issue, it went back to San Francisco, indeed, and there was concern over one of the large suppliers, one of the big energy service providers who was potentially going to contract with San Francisco, not being explicitly required to provide union labor in their contract. So it wasn't so much about the CCA as it was about the vendors and sort of the extrapolated issues. I do think there's lots of mitigation, and I know Woody Hastings may have lots to say about this, but there's a new advocacy organization, Californians for Energy Choice, that sprang up as a result of 2145 that will be looking at this.
I just have another question about the JPA and the board and how you can have two members on the JPA, but then the cities are members of the board. So can you kind of walk through that whole structure, if you would?
I don't know how to say it any other than the way that you just said it. I mean, that is the way it's set up. It's set up, the JPA was formed in December of 2012 between the Sonoma County Water Agency and the County of Sonoma. We formed the Sonoma Clean Power Authority. Those two signed the JPA. We created this separate legal entity. And part of the JPA document itself said any city that wants to participate in the Sonoma Clean Power program can do so by passing the required resolution and ordinance that's required under the Public Utilities Code. If they do that and allow us to serve in their jurisdiction, that city will then get to appoint a voting member to the board of directors of the JPA. And that's essentially what's happened. The cities that have come on have not signed the JPA, but they've passed the ordinance and resolution. We're serving them, people in their jurisdiction, and they've appointed members to our board. And they set, along with the water agency and county board members, set policy for Sonoma Clean Power.
And Steve, isn't the document available online?
Yeah, yes, it is. If you go to the Sonoma Clean Power website, they have all those documents there. Yes.
Is the Marin Clean Energy set up the same way, or theirs is different?
I think theirs was actually the cities came on as signatories to the JPA.
Yes.
Okay.
And again, you could do it either way. I think it's.
But the voting structure is similar. I think you have some additional requirements on your voting structures, but it's a similar two-tier structure for governance.
So they have the same voting rights, but they're not members of the JPA.
And see the reason that works, and I understand why because usually when a city public entity joins a JPA, it's because that public entity has some kind of interest that's being served by that. Here, it's just the city, other than the fact that they may be customers of Sonoma Clean Power in terms of their own particular load, the city as kind of a municipal jurisdiction doesn't really have any skin in the game. I mean, skin in the game. It's more for the benefit of the people in their jurisdictions, and so. I think that's part of the reason why we didn't feel like they needed to actually sign onto the JPA. All the revenues are going to be used for purposes of the program. At the end of the day, there's if the thing ever winds up, which I can't imagine that it will, then conceivably, yeah, Sonoma County and the Water Agency might get a little, whatever, they might get back something that the other participants don't. But I think nobody's expressed that as a concern so far.
So I would like each of you to think about one sentence that you would like to say as your final words. Starting with you, Steve. Starting with Steve.
It's going to be tough. I'm channeling Jeff Cybers now. No, I think prepare to hear things that you'll just shake your head and go, I cannot believe I heard that. And realize that that's something you just, oh, that's 2 sentences. And realize that's just something, it's kind of like Jeff said, really learn about everything so that when you hear those things that you just go, you know, like, whoa, I live right next to the geysers. All my power is renewable. I mean, what do you do with it?
1 sentence. Sorry. Keep it simple and don't overpromise.
Ooh, nice. Draw on the experience of others and give us a call.
Use the CPUC as a resource.
All right,
Yeah,
to give
CPUC staff.
Thank you. Let's hear another hand for our funny panelists.